Hey everyone, it's me again, Tommy Canale. Welcome to Before the Lights podcast, the show to find out how those in sports, music, and entertainment made their mark. Please go to the web and see us at beforethelightspod.com and follow us on Instagram at beforethelightspod. Go subscribe to the show and share it so we can grow our community. Go grab a cup of coffee, or if it tickles your fancy, like mine, go grab a drink. Tell your family, friends, neighbors, and yes, tell a stranger. In today's world, tell them, and that's about it. It's time to get our show started with our guest. And my guest today is an award-winning sports journalist for CBSSports.com, a studio analyst and sideline reporter for CBS Sports Network. He has his own radio show in Memphis, Tennessee with ESPN and is the co-host of the CBS Eye on College Basketball podcast. Some people call him GP. Gary Parrish, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, man. It's good to talk to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to kick things off. I want to kind of rewind your mind, so to speak, and start here with, where did the love to write and read come from for you?
Well, I think it initially, I always was a reader, like at a very early age. My grandfather had a subscription to Sports Illustrated, and he would hand it to me after he read it cover to cover. And so I was always interested in sports, and then always just a reader by nature. In terms of writing, I don't know that I had a passion for it at any point, but I had teachers who told me I was good at it, that I had a talent for it. And I didn't know if that was true or not. I guess I'm not 100% sure it's true even to this day. But I really just started connecting things that I liked and that I was told I was good at. And that's how I ended up with my career. In other words, if it were up to me, I'd have played second base for the New York Mets, but I wasn't good enough to do that. So I said, I love sports. I've got teachers who tell me I can write. Maybe I will be a sports writer. And it's really did work out that way. I was a little naive to how it might unfold, but I always laugh about this when I look back on it. Like, I can remember like my junior year, senior year, my girlfriend, high school girlfriend, we'd have like a high school beauty pageant. She would be in it. And what they would do is like a little bio for the escorts and the contestants. And it would be like, this is Amy, and she's a junior, and her plan is to go to Ole Miss and major in accounting. And then Amy in real life would like just, she'd be in junior college and then doing something else, and it would be like, this is Billy, and his plan is to go to Tennessee and then be a doctor. And then you'd see Billy, and he'd be doing something just very different than that. I can remember, like, if you could ever find footage of it, it was like, her escort is Gary Parrish. Gary is a senior, and his plan is to go to the University of Memphis and study journalism and be a sports writer. And that is exactly what I did.
That's pretty cool. It's kind of tagged that you knew what you want to do from a young age. And a lot of people these days change their mind so often. And to hear somebody that knew what they wanted to do at a young age and follow it through is pretty cool.
Yeah. I recognize that that's not normal. And I also acknowledge, like, it doesn't have to be. Like, it's A-okay to not know what you want to do with your life when you're 17, 18 years old. Some people don't figure it out until a much later time. In fact, one of my best friends in the world is Jeff Calkins, who's a award-winning columnist at the Daily Memphian. And he went to, Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law, was a lawyer in Washington, D.C., and just decided he hated it and wanted to be a sports writer. So then he went to Columbia Journalism School, and all these years later, he's a columnist. And so he didn't know what he wanted to do until he was in his late 20s, already out of law school, already having been a lawyer. So just because I had a good idea of what I wanted to do when I was young, it doesn't mean that's what I expect my children to do, or it doesn't mean that you're crazy or misguided or unfocused if you don't have a clear vision at that age. Most people don't. I just did.
That's cool. Do you remember writing your first sports column?
I remember the first thing I ever did was for the Maroon Tribune. I went to a place called Horn Lake High School, and the newspaper was the Maroon Tribune. And so I would, I would cringe if I looked back on it. I'm sure I've got that stuff somewhere. My mother does, but it was just, you'd write, you do your best. That's all you do at that age is you just do your best. If you're getting words on a page, you're doing pretty well at that age. So I wrote for the high school newspaper, and then there was a little community paper. I don't know if it was the DeSoto Times or something like that. And I would cover high school football for them, even while I was in high school. So I was published, when I was still in high school by an actual newspaper. Now it was like a weekly, community, very small, but it was still neat for me when you're 17, 18 years old and you see your name in a newspaper, regardless of what newspaper it is. That's a pretty cool feeling. I remember being very proud of that because the truth is, I was not the best student. I was not the most focused student. Um, you know, I don't know that many of my teachers who saw me work on a day-to-day basis in algebra class or chemistry class would have expected me to have the type of career that I've had, or to even be successful in any way, because I wasn't the guy who turned in all my homework on time, but I really did at some point develop a passion for being a reporter, for being a writer, and I was pretty intensely committed to it at a young age.
You ended up moving up and eventually working at the Commercial Appeal newspaper in Memphis. How long were you there, and what did that teach you that maybe you used to move yourself even forward in your career?
I'll say it's wild because every once in a while I'll go speak to journalism classes at various campuses when I'm traveling. Somebody's nice enough to ask, and if I can do it, I try to, because I remember what it was like to be them, to be uncertain, to not know if you were going to be able to do this. And so one of the things you get asked all the time is to tell your story. And so I tell my story, and then I immediately follow it up by saying, now this won't be your story, because my story doesn't even make any sense. I got lucky a lot of different times, a lot of different ways. And so let's just back up a little bit, if you don't mind, and I'll try to
Absolutely.
walk through it at a pretty good pace. Listen, I had no inherent advantages to trying to pursue this career. I'm the first college graduate in my family. My father worked at a meat packaging plant. My mother worked at a casino, and this is just listen, and they were awesome, and they provided everything for my brother and I. And I still live within 10 minutes of both of them to this day, and I'm lucky to do so. I only bring that up to point out, it's not like my father could make a phone call or my mother could make a phone call, or forget that, give me any advice on what to do. They didn't know what to do. So I was sort of going through it completely naive and on the fly. And so I believe it was after a couple of years of college. I'm a junior at the University of Memphis now, and I'm working on the campus newspaper. And I had written. Well, I'll just tell this story because it's the first step in a bunch of steps.
Perfect.
So I'm working at the campus newspaper as a junior year, in my junior year, and we're working on the back to school paper, and we worked on it maybe for 2 weeks, and then it came out, and I just remember I'm walking on campus and I pick it up, and you just again have that sense of pride, like, wow, like I helped make this, and there's my name, and those are my words. And then I went to my classes, and I popped into the newspaper office again, and one of my professors said, okay, well, what do you got for tomorrow? And I was like, ugh, I didn't even think about tomorrow. Like, I was so focused on trying to get the back to school issue, I didn't even plan any further than that. So I'm scrambling, and I'm uncertain, but I like BS'd her enough to, oh, well, I got some things I'm working on. I had nothing. Okay. And meantime, this is a time, I graduated college in 1999. So this is a time where you couldn't just pull your schedule up on, your phone. Like, the world didn't work that way.
Sure.
And I had lost my schedule. I didn't know where I was supposed to be tomorrow. So I had to go to an office and print out the schedule. And at the time, there was a basketball prospect from Memphis named Jimmy Hunter. And school is starting, and for whatever reason, it had never been reported where he was going to go to college. He was clearly a Division I prospect, but nobody had ever reported he's going to junior college, he's going to Tennessee, he's going to Memphis, he's going anywhere. And this again is a time where the internet's not really a thing. So it's not like you could just like jump on and research, hey, I wonder whatever happened to Jimmy Hunter. It was just sort of like not known. And so I'm standing in line to get my schedule, and I'm watching people walk up to the window, and they say, okay, what's your last name? And somebody will say Smith. And they say, okay, what's your first name? And you say Justin, and they just print it out. Here you go. Here's your schedule. And I'm watching this, and I'll never know why this popped into my head, but it popped into my head. And I walked up to that window, and they said, what's your last name? And I said, Hunter. And they said, what's your first name? I said, Jimmy. And they said, here you go. I had his schedule.
Wow.
He was enrolled at the University of Memphis. So I get back to the newspaper building, and I said, hey, here's what I'm working on. Jimmy Hunter is enrolled at the University of Memphis. And I start reporting. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm reporting, making phone calls, and I ultimately get it confirmed that he is enrolled at Memphis because he had academic issues, which is why it was always uncertain where he was going to end up. And I ended up being able to report in the campus newspaper the next day that Jimmy Hunter was enrolled at the University of Memphis and on a presidential exemption. Like the president had to sign off to put him in school. And it was the first basketball prospect to get a presidential exemption since Penny Hardaway had gotten one, so long, 10 years earlier, whatever it was. So
that's a cool story, man.
I know. Okay. So I write that. The next day, the Commercial Appeal, the daily newspaper in Memphis at the time, they have to follow up on my story. All the local news stations have to follow up on my story. And there was a guy named Dennis Freeland who ran the Memphis Flyer, which was the alternative weekly. And he just liked the idea that this kid at the University of Memphis broke this story. Because, listen, it wasn't on Sports Center that night, but it was a big story in Memphis. And Dennis approached me, and he said, hey, would you like to start writing for me every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks? And so I started writing for the Memphis Flyer. And then from that, I started freelancing for the Commercial Appeal. And you can imagine what it must be like to be, 20 years old in college. You're breaking stories. You're writing for the Memphis Flyer. You're writing for the Commercial Appeal. And now I'm getting ready to apply for internships all over the country.
I was just going to go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm applying for internships all over the country. New York Times, LA Times, Chicago Tribune. I mean, I'm aiming high. And I can remember, this is how naive I was. I can remember like sitting around with my roommates, and I'm like, listen, LA would be awesome summer internship, be out in California, but like the New York Times is the New York Times. How would I turn that down? I guess I'll just have to figure that out when the time comes. That was my mindset.
Where your grades are at and why some of your instructors may go, I'm kind of shocked to where Gary's ended up. But when you tell the story, it makes perfect sense.
I was really motivated to try to become what I wanted to become. I wasn't motivated to get an A in algebra class, but I was motivated to put myself in a position to become what I wanted to become. And so now I'm applying for all these internships. I probably sent off to 20, name the 20 best sports departments in the country, more or less. I applied to all of them, including the Commercial Appeal, where I had already been freelancing. Okay. I'd say out of the 20 places I applied, I didn't even hear back from 10 of them. Nothing. Not even a form letter that says thank you, but no thanks.
Right.
I got nice letters back from some that said thank you, but no thanks. Got nothing back from the Commercial Appeal, which was heartbreaking. And the only offer I got was at the Birmingham Post-Herald, which was the afternoon newspaper in Birmingham, Alabama. That's the only people that actually were interested in me. And I ended up accepting that internship. But that was a pretty humbling experience because that was the first time I ever realized maybe I'm not built for this. Maybe I thought I would have endless options and I had one. Now it was a great option, but again, 2 weeks earlier I was talking about LA or New York. I didn't expect to spend the summer in Birmingham, but it was an incredible experience. Like the columnist there at the time, Paul Feinbaum. So I'm a junior in college working with Paul Feinbaum. Not really working with him. Like I saw him 5 times the whole summer, but still, it was an incredible experience.
I'll bet. And I'm
Yeah.
sure, and no disrespect to where you ended up in Birmingham, but I'm sure that wasn't in your top 10 list when you sent out 20 form letters.
No, the only reason I even applied for it is because one of my professors used to work at the Birmingham Post-Herald, and she suggested you should apply there. And honestly, just to make her happy, I was like, okay, fine, I'll send it there, but I'm not going there. And then it was my only option. So come back from my senior year and humbled a little bit. Great experience, but recognizing this isn't as simple as I might have imagined. Like maybe Sports Illustrated isn't really going to hire me the second that I graduate college. And so I'm doing my senior year and I'm freelancing for the Commercial Appeal. Like it feels like 3-4 times a week, like Friday night football, Saturday night this. I'm writing nonstop for the Commercial Appeal. And so my parents would ask me about this. And I said, well, this seems pretty clear that they're just going to hire me when I graduate because they love me. They use me every day. They're constantly asking me, hey, can you go cover this softball game? Can you go cover this soccer game? Like they can't wait to hire me. What I realized later is that I was just cheap labor. I was $40 a story. And so when they would have to give their actual reporters a day off, they could get me for $40 to go cover a football game. So they didn't love me. I mean, I think they liked me, but I had it all backwards. They weren't using me because they loved me. They were using me because I was competent and very, very cheap.
At the same time, were you still covering stuff for the University of Memphis too?
Yes. I was doing everything.
Okay.
Was doing to the point where I don't even know what my college GPA was, but it was not great. but I was working on this stuff nonstop. So then my senior year, I apply. I think the Commercial Appeal is just going to hire me. They're not. What I learned is that, I don't care how much anybody likes you. If there's not a spot available at a newspaper, they can't just invent a spot for you, or at least they weren't going to just invent a spot for me. But they did offer me a 3-month internship. And I didn't have anything else to do, so I took the 3-month internship. And then they offered me, they could extend it another 3 months. So then I took that. But then there was something in I don't know, the rules, if you will, that they could not extend an internship past 6 months. Like at that point, they either got to hire you or you got to go on your way. And with about, I don't know, 6 weeks left in that, I realized that I was not going to have a job at the Commercial Appeal. I was a college graduate. I had done all of these things, but there was no job for me. And for the first time in my life, I realized like that working at the Commercial Appeal was always like, well, that's my backup plan if the New York Times doesn't want me. And now I'm having to realize this is not even like going to work. They don't have a job for me. And so trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And I think I had a possible option at a paper in Riverside, California, making nothing. Or there was a fellowship at the Arizona Republic that I think I had a shot at, if I remember correctly. But I suddenly was a college graduate and had no idea what I was going to do. And then probably 2 weeks before that internship, and this is where the luck starts to happen. About 2 weeks before that internship is open, the Commercial Appeal had 2 prep writers. And I won't name them because one of them is still in the business and like he's doing well. So I wouldn't want to bring attention to this incident. But one of them got into a physical altercation with the sports editor. Like they were throwing things at each other in the office. Okay. So they fire him because of course they fire him.
Yeah.
So with 2 weeks left of my internship, they had a prep job open that otherwise would not have been there. That is the only reason I got hired, because this person got into a physical altercation with the sports editor. Otherwise, I have no idea what happens to me. But under those circumstances, they were able to hire me full time. And that's how my professional career really got started at the Commercial Appeal.
And everybody needs a break, and that was your break. GP, did you have some early mentors or influences, people that influenced you early on that still does to this day?
Well, I mentioned Jeff Calkins. When I first became a columnist, people would tell me, oh, you write a lot like Jeff Calkins. And it wasn't intentional. It was just, I read him every day. I grew up reading him. Like, he's the guy. It's funny because we're close friends now. Our families are close. Our kids go to school together. But there was a time where I was in high school and I'd be sitting in class reading a Jeff Calkins column. So it's sort of neat the way our careers have now, and our lives have now intertwined, because he was the guy I looked up to when I was young, and in many ways still is. And he was somebody who helped me very early in my career, because to pick back up, and I'll speed it up a little bit, but now I'm a prep writer at the Commercial Appeal, and I realized pretty quickly that you're not gonna outright people about a Germantown versus Whitehaven Friday night football game. Like, that's not how you're gonna make a difference or make anybody notice you. And so I started really trying to focus on big stuff that could resonate. And I ended up, and I only tell this because it's a part of a story that opened up other doors for me, but I ended up breaking what was at the time the largest confirmed recruiting scandal, cash money, in the history of college athletics. I believe that is the accurate way to put it. In other words,
Yeah, the Albert Means.
the Albert Means story. I broke a story about a Alabama booster named Logan Young, who lived in Memphis, paying $150,000 to Albert Means' high school coach to get Albert Means, who was the number one defensive tackle prospect in America, to commit and ultimately enroll at the University of Alabama. And I broke that story in January after Albert's freshman year at Alabama. And what that led to was just all sorts of stuff. 3 different men were indicted on federal charges, convicted of federal charges. Multiple college football programs, Alabama and Kentucky, were placed on probation and seriously sanctioned. Football coaches lost their jobs. It was really a wild time. And that more than anything is what started presenting me with opportunities where I could, go down the path that led me to where I am right now.
I have some true false for you, and one of them is in relation to this story that you broke. Is it true or false that due to a girl breaking up with you that helped you lead to breaking this story?
It's yes. I mean, it's got something to do with that. So here's, I had gone to LA with this girl I had just started dating. I had a friend he's still a friend. He's an entertainer, and he was playing a private party in LA for New Year's Eve. And he was like, "Hey, if you want to go, I'll say you're my assistant. And if you want to bring your girl, we can say she's my hair and makeup. And like, they're going to cover everything. Like, it's a very wealthy person's party. They don't care. Do you guys want to go?" And I was like, "Sure. Of course I want to go." And she's on board too. So we go to LA, and we have what I thought was a great time. But when we got back from LA, she got back with her ex-boyfriend. Now, like, this girl, I would not call her my girlfriend. We dated for a month.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, but
it was
like,
an acquaintance.
Yeah, it was an acquaintance. We had a good time for a month. And so when we got back from LA, this is right after New Year. It's over with. Like, she's back with her ex-boyfriend, and I'm not talking to her anymore. So I got a lot of time on my hands. Like, I'm not distracted by anything. And I also at the time had a sports editor who just wanted people in the office all the time. That's not the way most sports departments run, even back then. But this guy wanted people in the office at all times, which is fine, whatever. But suddenly I'm in the office. I've got no significant other. And remember, I'm a prep writer, so there's not much to do. School's out. The kids haven't gone back to school yet. So it's not like there's basketball games to cover or anything else. I honestly, I'm sitting in my cubicle and I have nothing to do. And I had for a while heard rumors about the Albert Means, Logan Young situation. If I'm being honest, everybody had, like lots of people had. But I just decided I got nothing else to do. I'm going to start making phone calls on this. And I started making phone calls on this. And it's amazing to look back on it. Within a few hours, I had a former Tresvant High assistant named Milton Kirk on the record telling me that he and Lynn Lang, the former head coach at Tresvant High School, had sold Albert Means to Logan Young so that Albert Means would go to Alabama. I started working on that. I started making the phone calls on that one morning, and I had that guy on the record that afternoon, and we published maybe 3 or 4 or 5 days later, because you can imagine. I mean, you guys also think like who I was at the time. I was a 23, 24-year-old prep writer, got the biggest story in college athletics. My editors were reasonably skeptical and hesitant. So we really had to jump through some hoops to get to a place we could ever publish. But to answer your question, it is true. If not getting dumped, if you will, after getting back from LA, I might have been focused on other things and not pursuing this as seriously as I ultimately did.
And another break happens. It opened up more doors. Where did this story end up leading you to next then?
Okay, so I got a lot of offers to do, like, cover college athletics at that point, because it was weird. I break this big story, and then we're reporting, and then I'd look up and I'm back covering a high school soccer game, and that was a weird thing. Like I'm writing these big national stories, and now I'm at a high school soccer game. Like, is this really like what is this really what I ought to be doing? And so I was motivated to try to. I didn't want to cover high school sports anymore. I felt like I had. If you can't get off the prep beat with this story, like, then maybe this ain't the right career for me. So I had a lot of. I started like applying for jobs, and I had people reach out to me. I remember the Tallahassee paper reaching out to me about being the Florida State beat writer. And then you have to understand, like, I'm from Memphis, so I didn't want to just leave home for nothing.
Sure.
But eventually, I got a call from the New York Daily News, and they were launching a sports investigative team, where they were going to, just a sports investigative team, and they were interested in maybe me being a part of it because I had just broken this big sports story by investigating. But you got to remember, again, the time. This isn't a time where you could just jump on Facebook and find out everything you want to know about people. They didn't really know anything about me other than my name's Gary Parrish and I broke this big story. And so I went and met with Terry Thompson, who was the sports editor at the Daily News at the time, in New York. I think I was up there for the draft. And we met at Rue 57, so right there in Midtown Manhattan. And when I walked in and sat down, the first thing she said was, if I remember correctly, the first thing she asked me was, "How old are you?" And I told her, and she was like, "Oh God." Like, she had no idea I was as young as I was, because I was maybe 24 years old, like maybe 24 years old. And so we had a great conversation, but my age was clearly something working against me. And so I walked out of the meeting and I called my wife, and my wife was like, "How did it go?" And I said, "I think it went well. Like, my age is a problem, but I think I've still got a shot at this, no matter, even, despite my age." And she didn't seem excited. My wife didn't. And I was like, because before, she was very excited about the possibility we can move to New York. Two kids from Mississippi moving to New York City in our early 20s. Like, what a deal. And the reason my wife wasn't excited, I found out, is because she had just taken a pregnancy test, and we were pregnant with our first child. And so this is obviously a problem, because we had already discussed like what my assignments might be if I took this job. And it was going to be like going to Arlington, Texas, and researching the Rangers ballpark that was publicly funded, because the Yankees at the time were looking at doing a stadium and the Mets at the time were looking at doing a stadium. And so my job was going to be, I was going to be on the road for long periods of time. Meantime, my wife was going to be alone in the New York City area, pregnant with her first child. Her mom's her best friend. It became pretty clear to me that I can't take this job right now, even if it's offered. But what I did try to do is take the possibility of the job and leverage it at the commercial appeal. And so I went to the editors there and I told them, I've met with the New York Daily News. I didn't lie to them. I didn't say I've got this offer, because I didn't have the offer. I do think I could have gotten the offer if I'd have really pursued it, but I backed off for reasons already stated. But I let them know, listen, I've met with the New York Daily News. I think they're interested. I don't want it to go this far. If you're willing to make me a Memphis basketball beat writer, I'll stay. I'll just tell them I'm out, move on, go get somebody else. And at the time that I was wanting to do this, the Memphis basketball beat writer was somebody named Zach McMillan, who actually wanted to get off of the beat because he had a young child, and he was just tired of the this is a time when John Calipari's the coach. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
is a 24-hour a day job. He was tired of that lifestyle. I wanted that lifestyle. So he stepped away. They moved me in. And that's how I become the beat writer at the Commercial Appeal covering John Calipari's. What ultimately, I covered some of his worst years and some of his best, but I was the full time Memphis beat writer for 4 years while John was there.
And you had a child coming in. So, GP, what was the biggest obstacle then at that point in time in your career? Was it handling balance between career and family?
Oh, sure. That's always the biggest obstacle. I never, people who are ambitious and who really work at this career, they are lying to you if they tell you they don't sacrifice something. Like I don't think you can be the reporter you want to be and the family person you want to be all the time without exception, because you just get taken away from things. I have friends of mine who were in this profession, and they would say things like, you know what, at 7 o'clock, I turn my phone off, I'm done. And I'm like, well, then that means you're not going to be good at your job. Like, this is not the profession where you can turn your phone off. I can't tell you how many times I've had to step away from dinners. I've had to step away from parties. I've had to leave things early because the job requires it. And it makes you, on some level, a less than what you should be husband and a less than what you should be father. But it makes you a better than you otherwise would be reporter and a better than you otherwise would be columnist. The best example of that is, so our first child is born. And by this time, at the time of this story, I'm at CBS, and I'm traveling all the time. I'm bouncing around, like always on the road. And this is a funny but also sad and eye-opening story. But one day we were driving out east, my wife, myself, and our oldest son, but at the time our only son. And he was probably this would have been maybe 2007. So he's probably like 4 years old. And he says, we're driving by the airport. And I swear to you, my little boy says, hey, Dad, there's your house. Pointed at the airport. And I said, what are you talking about? That's my house. And he said, that's where you live. And I was like, oh my God, my 4-year-old thinks that they dropped me off at that place and that's where I actually live. And then every once in a while I'll come back and I'll stay with them for a little while. But then I go back to my house, which is the airport. Like, my son thought I lived at the airport. And it just, like, you laugh about it, and then it opens your eyes a little bit.
Sure.
Like, what am I doing here? And so fast forward a few weeks, and we're watching Disney Channel because, he's of the age where you just watch Disney Channel all the time. And the Disney World commercial came on, and he said, Dad, could we go to Disney World? And I said, of course we can go to Disney World. He said, when? I said, we will go. We'll go this summer. And he said, are you going to go with us? I said, of course I'm going to go with you. And he said, is there going to be basketball there? And I said, no. And he just couldn't get his mind wrapped around the idea that I would go somewhere that basketball wasn't. And again, another just sad thing. So, like, that night, I went and booked like a 7-day trip to Disney World. And I picked what should have been the slowest time of the college basketball calendar. And I say, I'm going to go there and I'm really going to shut it off for a week and really try to show him that he is just as important as basketball. Like, I'm grinding the way I'm grinding so that I can hopefully, fast forward to present day, put him in a expensive private school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Set him up to be successful. Or at least that's the way I rationalized it at the time. But I need to show him that I can be present in the ways that I need to be present. So we're going to Disney World. Phones off. I'm not lying or exaggerating. We took off from Memphis International, landed in Orlando, and in those 2 hours, 20 minutes that we were in the air, Billy Donovan left Florida for the Orlando Magic. That happened in my flight. So rather than land and go to Disney World, you know what we did? Landed, went to McDonald's because they had Wi-Fi. I sat there, reported, wrote a column while my kid played on a McDonald's playground. That's the way the Disney World trip started. And then You might remember that story. Billy then leaves the Magic, goes back to Florida. Mm-hmm. So I'm dealing with that. And if you I promise you, you could talk to anybody in my profession, and they've all got a story just like that. The juggling of your personal life and your professional life is is a very tough thing. And one of the things that I'm fortunate to have is a wife who has seen me grow, be this. Like she knew me when I was a prep writer, at the Commercial Appeal, and so she has seen. It's the only husband she's ever known. So she's very understanding of it. But I would tell anybody, if you're a man, like whatever, like you better have an understanding husband or an understanding wife if you're going to try to be all these things that we try to be. Because if you don't have somebody who's patient and understanding, it's a hard thing to try to keep in a good place.
Fast forwarding now at CBS, what have been all the positions you've held or titles you've held at CBS?
It's funny, like my first job, and like here's another place where luck, comes into it. Greg Doyle was the college basketball columnist for CBSSports.com before I got that job. And I knew Greg a little bit because he lived in Cincinnati. It's just so funny to think about all the coincidences that lead to your life, that make your life happen. Greg lived in Cincinnati, and he was the college basketball columnist for CBSSports.com. Well, I covered Memphis. Well, Memphis and Cincinnati were in the same league. So I would see Greg Doyle at basketball games and media days. And I won't say that we were friends, but we knew each other. And so when it gets announced, like I think there was a website called sportsjournalist.com, like there's a thread, Greg Doyle is going to become a general columnist, and now CBSSports.com is looking for a college basketball columnist. I was like, man, that is perfect, because I could live wherever I want to live, which is home, but then I would have a national platform. Like, I don't know if I'm good enough to get this job, but man, this is the job I would want. So I emailed Greg and I said, hey, man, I don't even know if this is out of line. Like, I might just be, I might be lacking self-awareness of who I am. But who would I even reach out to if I wanted to be considered for this position? And he said, they've already got your name.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, I was blown away by that because I didn't expect it. And so we go through the interview process. And so so Greg Doyle had told them, hey, here's one guy you should consider. He's a beat writer, covers John Calipari. That's the other thing. If I was just the Memphis beat writer, who would even be seeing my work outside of Memphis? But I covered John Calipari. People were interested in John Calipari from coast to coast. Like, one of my best friends in the world right now, to this day, is Adrian Wojnarowski. Woj and I bonded over, he covered John Calipari when John was with the Nets, and I covered John when John was at Memphis, and we would just get together on the road and trade John Calipari stories. And now, he's one of my best friends. Our wives are friends, but we met because of the John Calipari thing. And so because I covered John Calipari, national people like Greg Doyle would read me, and then I guess they saw something there. So Greg Doyle had given my name to these editors. And ultimately we get down to there's a handful of us that are being considered for this job. And you'll recognize all the names. I think that at the end of it, there were 4 people being considered for the job. Pete Thamel, who was at the New York Times at the time, Jeff Goodman, who was at Fox Sports at the time, Mark Schlabach, who was at the Washington Post at the time, and me. So it's a little bit like the Sesame Street thing. One of these things isn't like the others. You got the New York Times, Fox Sports, the Washington Post, and the Commercial Appeal. So I'm already feel like I'm up against it. And I'll never forget, I got on a conference call with Mark Swanson, who was the editor at the time, and his right-hand man was a gentleman named Craig Stanke, who has subsequently passed. And the very first question Craig Stanke asked me, I appreciated the question. He said, let me just ask you this, and I don't want you to take offense because I don't mean it that way, but I'm genuinely curious. I said, of course, whatever. He said, if you are good enough to have this job, why are you still at the Commercial Appeal? And I told him the story. Well, I wouldn't be. And I was probably be at the New York Daily News right now. But my wife got pregnant, and I didn't think it would be wise to move her away from home. at a time when I would be traveling. I felt like that would damage our relationship. I'd be working at the New York Daily News, but I'd be sending child support checks back to Memphis. And I stopped pursuing that, and I stayed home really for the sake of my family. But I told her at that time, or we talked about at that time, like one day we're going to have to leave, and we're ready. We've been ready to do that now for a couple of years. And I think he was impressed by that answer because I actually had an answer for the question. Like, I'm in Memphis still because I chose in that moment family over career, but now we're in a good place and we're ready to focus on career. And so I felt like that interview went well. But here's the truth, and Pete Thamel is one of my close friends as well, and I've joked with him about this over the years. Pete Thamel got offered that job before I did. If Pete would have taken it, who knows where I'd be right now. But Pete turned it down, and then they offered it to me. And my first job, yeah.
I was going to say, another break.
Another break, right. Like Pete just decided at the last minute, I'm just going to stay at the New York Times. If he wouldn't have decided that, I mean, maybe then I applied for the New York Times job that he had. I mean, who knows? But I'd like to think things would have worked out, but they wouldn't have worked out this way unless those things happen. At the Commercial Appeal, a guy has a physical altercation with a sports editor. A girl that goes to LA with me gets back with her ex-boyfriend. So I start making these phone calls because I got nothing else to do. Pete Thamel turns down the CBS job, so they offer it to me. It's all these little things. And so I was a college basketball columnist, and my job was to write 3 columns a week. That's it, 3 columns a week. And that was during the season. In the off season, you could maybe get away with doing 1. That was my job. And when you contrast it with what my job is now, like it's like back then podcasts weren't a thing. Now I host a podcast 3 times a week. We have CBS Sports HQ. So that's, a 24-hour online streaming service. I'm a presence on that basically every day. I do television work. I do sideline work. The idea that I do all the things I do now, that is something that has happened over time. But that is not my original job title. My original job was just a columnist for .com, write 3 columns a week during the season. Everything got, and then slowly but surely it evolved into, I think I'm one of the few people who actually works .com, Sports Network, does sideline, host a podcast. I might be the only person in the CBS family, if you will, who does all of those things.
And add on top of it, you have a radio show and you do the top 25 and 1 almost every day.
Yeah, you would think, I figured out over the years that the smart people are the ones who get 1 great job, not the people who get 11 great jobs. Like I really, you wonder if you're going to work yourself to death someday. But I will tell you, sometimes people, because to your point, yes, I host a radio show 5 days a week. I host a podcast 3 days a week. I write columns for CBSSports.com. I do sideline reporting. During the season, I fly back and forth to New York every week. I'm in studio every Tuesday and Wednesday night. I have all of these responsibilities. And some people look at that and they go, oh, wow, he is super ambitious. He's just constantly trying to climb. And I think that was true once upon a time. But as I've gotten older, I don't know that it's true anymore. I think now, we reached a point over the past decade where I watch talented people lose their jobs. Like people I know are good who couldn't find good work anymore in our profession because it's a hard profession. So the truth is, I do everything I do out of fear. I want to try to make myself as valuable as I can make myself to everybody who's willing to pay me and show that I can do all of these things. Like I might not be the best at any of them, but I can do all of them. And it's not rooted in ambition as much as it's rooted in insecurity. Like I'm scared that I won't have these opportunities someday. So I take advantage of all of the opportunities as much as I can while I actually have them.
While we're talking about podcast, for those listeners out there, if you are a college basketball fan and you're not listening to the CBS Eye on College Basketball podcast with Gary and Matt Nordlander, you need to look that up, subscribe to it, and start listening to these guys 3 days a week. It's a little more in college basketball. It's a great podcast. I love listening to it. As GP says many times a week when I listen to it, you know, sometimes they discuss camel fighting, and he calls his co-host Matt Deadleg Norlander, which is a whole different story. So it's a great podcast. How did that idea come about?
That podcast has had a whole bunch of different versions. I think it actually launched with Norlander hosting it, and it would be me, Norlander, Jeff Goodman, then me, Norlander, Jeff Borzello, then me, Norlander, Sam Vecini. And at one point, the higher ups, and this is no disrespect to Norlander, he's terrific, but they were like, "You're a radio host. Like, why don't we have you hosting the podcast?" Because I had some success in radio. And I said, I'm willing, I never wanted to overstep my place and say, I'm taking over the podcast. But I was told to take over the podcast because I don't know why. They just decided they wanted me to do it. So we sort of flipped the roles around. And then we would still, we bring on guests and we bring on coaches. And what we found at some point was that, and you could probably tell by this podcast, I'm a lengthy talker. And so the more voices, the worse. The fewer voices, the better. And what we found is that what we thought could work is, let's just have me and Norlander every episode. We'll talk. Because if you bring on a guest, I'm suddenly just asking questions of that guest. And what they wanted it to be was you make it your podcast. You talk, you tell the stories. And so we just said, okay, it'll be me and Norlander, and we'll just talk about the biggest issues in the sport or whatever it is we want to talk about. And if you listen regularly, sometimes it's very structured. Sometimes we get off on things we had no idea we were going to get off on. Sometimes we're being serious. Sometimes we're laughing hysterically. But it really did develop into something that that generated an audience. Like, I'm blown away by the number of people who listen to that consistently, especially in the off season when there's not much going on. It has, and I don't say this for any other reason than I guess, identify the growth of the podcast. It's become, one way or another, for whatever reason, it's become the most listened to college basketball podcast that exists. And we tapped into something. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but we tapped into something, and it's made it. And even back then, we were still just doing it once a week. But then they recognized, hey, if people really want this more than once a week, can you figure out a way to give it to them? And so now we do it 3 times a week, sometimes more than that. It's a grind, but we have fun doing it. I can genuinely tell you that I don't love everything I do for work, but I can genuinely tell you I love doing the podcast, and I love doing radio, and I love being in studio with on the television side, because that's just a blast, every single time. I guess I'd put it this way. I would have never thought about this when I was coming out of college, because all I wanted to do was be a writer. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a reporter. In fact, when I was in college, they actually would make you pick, or advise that you pick, what do you want to do? You want to be a writer? Do you want to be in radio? Or you want to be in television? Because people didn't do all 3. So I never took a television class in college, never took a radio class in college. I just wanted to be a writer. Fast forward all these years, I do all of those things. And it's why my advice to young people is figure out how to do all of them. Because if you're good at one of them, they're going to ask you to do all of them. So figure out how to do all of them. But if I'm being completely honest, my least favorite part of the job in the year 2020 is actually writing. I don't enjoy writing as much as I used to enjoy writing, because the reason I wanted to write, I think, is because that was the only way I had to tell people what I think. Well, now I can tell people what I think on a podcast. I can tell people what I think on radio. I can tell people what I think with a tweet, with a Facebook post. I don't need to write the column anymore to tell people what I think. And so I still think I love a great completed column more than anything else, but the process of it is work now. I feel like I'm working when I'm writing. On radio and podcasts and television, I usually just feel like I'm having a blast.
Folks, for everybody out there, go to the show notes. I'll have links to the Eye on College Basketball podcast, also to GP's podcast with his radio show with 92.9 ESPN in Memphis, Tennessee. And Gary, one last thing before I let you go, and you kind of hinted on a little bit about giving advice to others, but do everything. But is there anything else you'd like to tell somebody that's trying to break into the business?
Find your niche and work hard. Like, especially if you're a writer, you're not going to be able to outwrite people when you're young. You're probably not as good as you think you are. The thing that separates young people, at least this is my experience. Sure, talent matters, but work ethic is the most important thing. Get a foot in the door. Wherever you're trying to go, get a foot in that door. That's the best place to. That's the best way to possibly put yourself in a position to get the opportunity that you want. And don't ever think that anything's beneath you. In the beginning, like when I was in college, I had friends who were bartending, waiting tables, and making hundreds of dollars a night doing that. And I was writing a football story for $40. I didn't have much money. I had a hard time getting by. But when we all got out of journalism school, I was the one that got a job, and they were the ones still looking for jobs. So in this profession, more than any other, you got to be able to show people that you can do the work. I've interviewed, again, with, CBS Sports, the Commercial Appeal once upon a time, the New York Daily News. I've never had anybody ask me what my grade point average was. I've never had anybody ask me for my transcript. They just wanted to know, could you do the work? And so learn how to do everything. And I can't stress this enough. It's changed so much since I was in college. 20 years ago, you needed to pick. You want to be a writer? Do you want to be in radio? Do you want to be in television? Now, if you were good on television, somebody's going to ask you to write something. If you're good on radio, somebody's going to want to put you on television. If you're a great writer, somebody's going to want to put you on radio. I mean, that is how I ended up on radio, is because I was writing about Tiger basketball every day, and there's a big audience for that in Memphis. So the radio host in Memphis would have me on for 20 minutes at a time, for an hour at a time. Then somebody realized, oh, well, this guy can talk and he can tell stories. And maybe we ought to give him a show. Next thing you know, I'm the radio host in Memphis. And so, like, learn to do everything, because if you actually are good, you're going to be asked to do everything. And if you ever want to break through and be the people that whoever your journalistic heroes are, the best way to do that is to do everything you can do and learn everything you can learn, and make yourself as valuable as possible, because that's the way you get noticed. Just writing columns about LeBron James on a blog that 3 people see, I don't care how great a column is, you're not going to get noticed. You got to find out a niche. Recruiting happens to be a one that people in sports go for all the time. I've seen it happen with my own eyes, and it's actually the best one to try to break in, or at least one of them, because you're the same age. If you're young, you're the same age as the recruits, or at least close to it. So you can create relationships with them that don't seem weird, and then you've got information, and information is the thing that will make you important. News is the thing that will make you important. You're not going to impress anybody with how great you are on radio or television or as a writer at the age of 20, 21, 22, probably, unless you're just a uniquely gifted person. But if you've got information nobody else has, that is a way to make people pay attention to you. And when people pay attention to you, maybe they'll see some of the other stuff.
That is golden nuggets there, people. I'm not kidding you. That is golden nuggets. GP, you a golfer?
I am. I'm not good at it. I wish I were better, but it is the thing I enjoy most. In terms of, if you told me I could wake up on Sunday morning and I've got the entire day free, what would I want to do? I would take my 3 friends that I play with consistently and go get on the golf course, get a drink or 2, and play 18 holes. That's a perfect way to spend a pleasant Sunday from my perspective.
All right. Well, once all this COVID-19 thing gets cleared out and people are back to doing whatever the new norm is going to be. I'm in Vegas. When you come out here, you're going to be my guest at Reflection Bay Golf Club. It's a top 100 course that the public can pay. It's a Jack Nicklaus signature design. It's located in the heart of Lake Las Vegas. For folks out there, go to reflectionbay.com. It played host to the Wendy's 3-Tour Challenge from 1998 to 2007. And GP, let me know when you're in town. We'll hook you up and we'll get you out there.
I'm going to take you up on that offer. That's really nice. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Gary, thanks so much for being on the show today. This has been great stuff for our listeners.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Again, thanks for having me. It's really a treat.
You bet. Everybody out there, if you'd like to send an email to myself, please go to the website, beforethelightspod.com. I hope you enjoyed the show today. For show notes, go to the website. Follow us on Instagram at beforethelightspod. For the extra 5, go to Patreon and also find out how you can get your name shouted out on the show. Thanks for listening to Before the Lights. I'm Tommy Canale. We'll talk to you next time.